Now I am recording those, so we're going to go from here. Reviewing Kosovo, okay? So this all, as I said, comes from your form notes, so be aware of that. Might not be a bad idea to have your form notes for Kosovo pulled up, this too, just to see if there's anything we need to add. Okay, go to the first slide. It's called Ethnic Tensions in Kosovo with Causes, okay? Everyone can see that right through there. Things to note, okay? That is a map on the side that I found on Google this morning. That is a ethnic breakdown of Serbia, okay? Why am I using Serbia here? Okay, so remember Yugoslavia, okay? Kosovo was a part of Yugoslavia. Serbia was a part of Yugoslavia. Originally, Yugoslavia had those 6 independent republics and 2 autonomous territories. Okay, those 2 autonomous territories are Vojvodina, I think I'm pronouncing that right, in northern Serbia, okay, and Kosovo, which at this time was in southern part of Serbia, okay? So that's why it's part of Serbia on this map. Now, if you're looking here, okay, this is an ethnic breakup. The darker the color, the more people of that race or that ethnicity that live there. So if you look at Kosovo, okay, Kosovo is the one on the bottom. If you don't know what Kosovo looks like, if you look at this blue flag up here between Georgia and British Columbia, it has the map of Kosovo on it, okay? The stars are on the top, okay? So we have that right through there. Okay, so you can see exactly the shape of Kosovo. Now, if you look on the map, okay, that you have on your screen right here, Kosovo is the one that's pretty much brown, okay? Now, brown represents Albanians. What religion are the Kosovar Albanians? What? They're Muslim, okay? They're Muslim. Kosovo, yes. Okay, so the brown one right down there is the Kosovar Albanians, okay, ethnically Islamic. So that you can see that right through there. Now, the rest of the country, okay, is largely blue, if you're seeing right through there, okay? So, blue is Serbian. What religion are the Serbs? Okay, Christian. Particularly which one? Orthodox. Okay, they're going to be Orthodox. If you look up on the top, okay, you're going to see Vojvodina. That's the one that is lighter blue. Okay, it's also going to have yellow for Hungary. They're predominantly Roman Catholic up there. Okay, so you have this big religious diversity. That is one of the main reasons that these 2 regions are autonomously different. Okay, other things to note. Albania. Remember when we talked about the Cold War? We briefly mentioned this, I guess. There was the split between Yugoslavia and Albania. You saw that. That cartoon of Tito getting like Khrushchev, okay, and Hokska from Albania with Mao. Okay, there is going to be a split between Albania and the rest of Yugoslavia in I think the 1960s, roughly. Okay, so the Kosovar Albanians are going to be naturally more aligned to Albania because they're speaking Albanian, they're ethnically Albanian religiously. It was between Yugoslavia and Albania. Okay, they both were kind of different. The leader of Yugoslavia was a lot like Stalin. Tito was not a Stalinist. Tito, remember, hated Stalin with a passion. Okay, there was that kind of tension right through there. Okay, so you're going to naturally be more aligned with the people that are like you. Okay, so Kosovo was always a little bit different. Ethnically, okay, there's that thing. Another thing to understand is when Tito was in power, Tito crushed any bit of nationalism in Yugoslavia because he realized that his country of Yugoslavia was incredibly diverse, okay, and that if you do not, or if you allow this nationalism to happen, Yugoslavia will crumble, okay? Tito dies in 1981, meaning he's no longer stopping this. So you're going to have kind of this nationalism in the region start boiling up, and that's going to come to the forefront. Okay? Does that make sense? So that's going to be the big understanding when it comes to talking about the problem, particularly with Kosovo. Okay? Okay. So ethnic tension in Kosovo, Donna. Okay, that's a good plan. I should please share it when I'm done. Ethnic tension in Kosovo. Okay, intervention by others. So, as a cause, okay, that was the last slide. Intervention by others. Based off of what we have already said, what two republics or countries do you think are really going to be interested in what's happening in Kosovo? Because they're ethnically what? Albanian. Okay? They're ethnically Albanian. So Albania is going to have an interest in what's happening there. Okay? Because the people are ethnically like them. Culturally, they act more like Albania. Okay? Kosovo, when it's a part of Yugoslavia, is an autonomous part of what republic? It's an autonomous part of what republic? Serbia. Okay, it's an autonomous part of Serbia. Serbia is going to be the other country that is heavily invested in what's happening within Kosovo. Okay, Albania is going to be one that's going to play a role. Another group, okay, not necessarily a country that's going to play a role, is NATO. Okay, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It is not officially led by one country. However, in theory and practice, the United States plays an incredibly large role in what's going on here. Okay, so NATO is going to play a role. Albania is going to play a role. Serbia is going to play a major role. Remember, Serbia kind of views Albania as the ethnic and historical basis for Serbian might and Serbian power. So you have that influence going on here inside of Kosovo as well. And you have the breakup of Yugoslavia. Okay, so you've got Yugoslavia in early 90s. Okay, the Cold War starts to end in 89. Like Germany falls, Romania, Hungary, all these previously communist countries stop being communist. Okay, Yugoslavia is a communist country. It's going to start to crumble. Slovenia breaks off. Okay, they have like 7 or 9 days war. You have Croatia, which breaks off, forms its own country. You get conflict there. You get Bosnia-Herzegovina breaking off, causing conflict. Okay, so all these little countries are going to be trying to get involved. Remember the miners' strike as well? Do you remember that? Okay, so the miners' strike in here, Kosovo was the region of Yugoslavia that had a lot of mines and produced a lot of minerals, which made the country a lot... No, sorry, miners is like ching, ching, ching. Okay, Kosovo was like the industrial part of, or like mining part of Yugoslavia. Okay, that brought them lots of money. Okay, Milosevic goes, and this is going to get into some of the other stuff. Okay, actually, I'm going to wait on that. Okay, but understand that's going to play a role in a second. Okay, Kosovo industrial part, money. Now, I'll talk about the Milosevic influx when we get to the next one on Milosevic. If you go to the next slide, okay, we're talking about Serbian nationalism. Okay, again, nationalism is that intense pride in your country. How did Tito feel about nationalism? Okay, Tito hated this idea of nationalism. Okay, but Tito's dead, meaning nationalism starts to come to power. In Yugoslavia, the largest of the republics was Serbia. Okay, so Serbia is the largest republic in here. It's also the one where the capital is located. And ethnically, the majority of people in Yugoslavia were Serbian. Okay, so they had the most amount of power. The Serbian nationalism is going to really start right. It's always been present, but it's going to really escalate once Tito kicks the bucket. Okay, so once Tito dies, the Serbian nationalism is going to really just prosper. Okay, Milosevic is going to really exacerbate that Serbian nationalism because it's going to give him power. Okay, there is a connection when we talked about authoritarian states in paper 1, and the way an authoritarian leader comes to power, how they use kind of the past and the culture to bring everything together. Milosevic does a lot of similar things. Okay, so you can build that connection. That will help you. Between authoritarian states and Milosevic and how Milosevic comes to power. Okay. So Serbian nationalism is huge. The Serbian nationalism is not happening just within the Republic of Serbia. It's going to be happening in the Serb majority parts of Croatia. It's going to be happening in Serb majority parts of Bosnia-Herzegovina as well. Okay, so this is not something that's happening in just one area. It's happening throughout. You also have a bunch of Serbians living in Kosovo. Okay, they are not the majority. Now, some Serbians will say that's different, because remember, this is intense, so I already know that when I do post this, I'm going to be getting ripped a new one by both sides of this argument, but that's okay. Nationalism, okay, particularly by Serbia, plays a large role in this conflict. Does that make sense? Okay, go to the next one on Milosevic. First off, who is Milosevic? Okay, not necessarily of Yugoslavia. Okay, he's going to be the leader, become the leader of Serbia. Okay, so he's originally comes in as like second in command. He goes to Kosovo, okay, at the Field of the Blackbirds, where the Battle of Kosovo took place in the 1300s, which Serbians view as kind of the center of their national identity. Okay, it happens there. This is where he goes and he invokes a lot of the imagery of the past. Okay, imagery of Serbian nationalism. He uses this to come to power. Okay, when he comes to power, he's ultimately going to replace his mentor and come and take over for him. Okay, one of the first things Milosevic does is he gets rid of the two autonomous provinces. Okay, he removes their autonomy. So they can no longer act like their own little republic. They're now forced to do whatever he tells them to do. Okay, if we look back on that ethnic map, again, Kosovo is ethnically not the same as the rest of Serbia. Okay, predominantly Islamic compared to predominantly Christian. There is going to be that difference in language, difference in culture, and just difference kind of all around.
So Kosovo is a Muslim country?
It's predominantly Islamic, yes.
Serbia is
Orthodox Christian, correct. Okay, so that is going to be playing a role as well. Okay, so Milosevic is going to inflame that nationalism. He is also going to replace leadership in Montenegro with someone who is loyal to him. Okay, and then he's going to appoint leadership in Vojvodina and Kosovo, which is also loyal to him. At the voting conference, okay, the voting Congress of Yugoslavia, each republic and the two autonomous regions have one vote. There's a total of 8 votes. Milosevic controls Serbia. He has someone loyal to him in Montenegro who will vote with him. He's got someone loyal to him in Vojvodina and Kosovo, the two former autonomous regions inside of Serbia. So Milosevic now effectively controls 4 of the 8 votes, meaning he can do whatever he wants from a political standpoint.
So he has 4 of the 8 regions who
Correct.
voted him and voted for him?
Pretty much. Yes. Okay. So the breakup of Yugoslavia, as I said, you've got the 8 republics in Yugoslavia: Croatia, Montenegro, okay, Northern Macedonia, as it's now known. Okay, it was known as just Macedonia at the time. Serbia. You've got Bosnia-Herzegovina. You've got Vojvodina, which is an autonomous province, okay, part of Serbia. Okay, Slovenia, and then Kosovo, which is the autonomous province inside of Serbia. Okay, Milosevic, as I said, is going to appoint people who are loyal to him in those 4 regions. So if you can see on the screen when you look at the video, you will see that he basically controls 4 of the 8 votes, meaning whatever he wants to have done, he can get done. Okay, why is that important for Milosevic to have power like that?
Because it's making him like stronger and he's having more people on his side.
Okay, if he controls 4 votes out of the 8 and the other side is going to vote against him, what happens though?
They get to revolt.
Okay, nothing gets done. You reach deadlock. Okay, if you have a system where you must reach a majority agreement, okay, and 4 voting one way all the time and 4 voting another way all the time, you're never going to have consensus, meaning nothing will ever pass. Okay, why is that problematic for a country to have that? Understand when it comes to Milosevic. Does that make sense? Any questions on Milosevic?
Just to be extra clear, so 50% of the votes means what?
When you have 50% of the votes, you can do whatever you want. You can't let anything, like, the other side tries to do something, you can effectively stop them. You can be an obstructionist and basically say you can do what we want or we're not going to let you do anything. And that's kind of what happens. The other thing that's going to happen with Milosevic that I was talking about with the miners, okay, the ones that dig underground, not underage, okay. Milosevic, when he removes the autonomy of Kosovo, the miners will strike, okay, and refuse to work. This is where Yugoslavia is making a ton of money. So when he gets rid of this, they strike, okay. He's going to send in the police force to basically force them to go back to work, okay. This is just going to inflame the tensions. When you have a strike and someone sends in the cops, it's kind of like escalating the problem. It's like if you're fighting with someone, okay, disagreeing about where you want to go to lunch, and suddenly someone starts insulting your mom, they've suddenly escalated the situation, okay? Someone pulls out a gun, they've really escalated the situation. You're going to go where they want to go to eat, but you're also going to hate them for it. This is kind of Milosevic's way of escalating the situation. Does that make sense? Okay. The next one, again, Albanian nationalism. Nationalism is what? That intense pride in your country. You were wrong, right? Everyone else sucks. Okay. Albanian nationalism is going to be happening a lot where? Yes, but where in Yugoslavia? Kosovo. Okay, this Albanian nationalism is going to take place primarily in Kosovo. Why? Because that's where the Albanians are living within Kosovo. Okay. Similar to Serbian nationalism, where they want a strong Serbia, they're going to want a strong Albania, okay, strong Kosovo or Albania. They don't want to be a part of Albania because they're Kosovars, but they want a country that is basically ruled with their ideas. They don't want to be subjugated to the minority under the other side, okay? Current system, when they're a part of Serbia, they're going to be a minority. If they are their own country as Yugoslavia, they're suddenly a majority and can do what they want.
So they're Kosovars, but their like background is Albanian.
Mm-hmm.
So like they're Albanian.
They're ethnically Albanian. Yes. It would be, for example, like if you were to move to London and live with a bunch of other Arabs, you're going to be technically, you're British technically, but you're also Arab. Does that make sense? Like you're ethnically still this way. You're going to bring about some of your Arab culture with you when you move somewhere else. And you've been living there. You end up kind of developing your own community. That's what's happening here.
Have they been like living there?
Generations for a long time. Yes.
Okay, so it's just like their background.
Yes. It's their culture. Just like Serbia has their own culture, Albania is going to have their own as well. Okay. So what that nationalism again that you have in Yugoslavia, okay, or in Serbia, you're going to be having in Albania as well. So really, if you were to ask for the root cause of this whole conflict, you could explain that nationalism as a whole was the cause of everything that happens in Kosovo. You can break it down even further by then saying Albanian nationalism, Serbian nationalism. Those are what's going to play a role. Make sense? Okay. Can I go to the next slide? Okay. United Nations. What is the goal of the UN? Donna.
The goal of the UN is to bring peace to the world and have countries connect together and solve world issues through their councils.
Okay. Peace, love, and joy by our SG. Yes. Okay. Basically, countries come together and stop conflicts from happening before they happen. Okay. There is a major crisis about to happen in Yugoslavia. Okay. Why does the United Nations not get involved? Why? Why is it too much to handle? Because it is a lot to handle, but why? Okay, there's a couple of reasons right through here. Number one, okay, this is happening in the 90s. Okay, you have the former communist countries falling apart. Okay, you've also got the shadow of Rwanda. This is happening after Rwanda. Okay, there's a genocide in Rwanda. The United Nations doesn't really do much to stop it. Okay, so there's kind of this shadow of Rwanda. You also have the Security Council. Okay, in the Security Council, there are 5 permanent members. Okay, one of those permanent members is Russia. Russia, historically, has very close ties to Serbia. If you look at World War I, why did Russia get involved? Because Serbia was attacked, or war was declared on Serbia. Okay, that's why Russia got into the war, which is ultimately got the French and British into the war. You have this kind of situation, okay? Russia is not going to allow the UN Security Council to make any resolution against Milosevic in Serbia. Okay, they support him, they back him. Again, the logistics of this as well, you don't really want to get into this conflict, get military stuck on the ground and bogged down in a war. Also, there is a somewhat legitimate argument being made by Milosevic that this is an internal matter within the borders of Serbia. It's not an international conflict. Okay, the UN is not necessarily set up to dictate conflicts happening in an individual country. Okay, they're set up to dictate what's going on between countries. Milosevic's argument is this is happening in Yugoslavia. Okay, let this be solved by Yugoslavia. We don't need an outside group coming in telling us what to do. We can handle this on our own. Okay. Now, some will completely disagree with that statement and say this is not the case. This is Milosevic's understanding. Okay, there are legitimate arguments on both sides. Be able to look at both sides and write an argument on both sides if needed. Go. What are your two questions? You basically don't want to have another, like, Korean War, for example. That was the United Nations forces going in. You don't want to end up getting caught in a fighting conflict. Yugoslavia, at this point, there's already been fighting in Croatia, very intense fighting. You've already had very intense fighting with UN peacekeepers in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and it's not really stopped anything so far. There's also that influence. It didn't really do anything having UN troops on the ground here. So what's the point of doing it here? That makes sense? Stay out of harm's way. We'll take it from there. Yes, I would think so. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but they can... I think it's probably part of that. But I mean, like, if you look at Rwanda, for example, that was considered a internal conflict that the UN was trying to solve. They didn't, though. I mean, they did, sort of, but not really. Because people were being killed. Genocide. Yeah. I mean, they should probably get involved before then, and they're going to try to, but ultimately... Another honest-to-God reason why is race. Race plays a huge role here as well. Milosevic is white. Europe's going to be more willing to listen to a white man. You look at the situation going on, how refugees are being talked about coming out of Ukraine today compared to refugees coming from Syria. Suddenly, it's okay to have refugees. We'll give you whatever you want, but if you're coming from the Middle East or Africa, we don't want you here. Race plays a huge role, whether you admit it or not. That's something else that people, I think, should be aware of when you're talking about this conflict, particularly when contrasting it to Rwanda. Okay? Can I go to the next one? Okay. Why would the UN administer Kosovo? Why would they get into Kosovo? Okay. You have a legitimate ethnic breakup here that also plays a large role. Okay. Where you do have a minority that has a reason to believe that they will be targeted based off of the past. Okay. Serbia, Yugoslavia, okay, but predominantly led by Serbia and Milosevic, has targeted the ethnic minorities in places like Croatia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Previously, there's reason to think he would do so with Kosovo. Also, Kosovo is a big deal for Serbia. Okay, Bosnia is a deal. It's not quite so big of a deal. Kosovo is a big freaking deal. Okay. The idea of this getting more involved and tensions rising and getting much worse is much greater in Kosovo than it is in other places. Okay? That's all I'm going to really say about this now. We'll come back to this one later. It's also the third strike, partially. Ethnically, it's much more homogenous and similar compared to places like Croatia. Croatia is predominantly Croat, but there's a large population of Serb there. Bosnia-Herzegovina is largely Serb, but it's also got a large population of Catholic Croats and a large population of Muslim Bosniaks. Kosovo is, ethnically speaking, dominated by Kosovars compared to... There's a minority of Serbs there. There are Serbs in Kosovo, but there's far less than in the other ones. The other ones are more diverse. Kosovo is not as diverse. They're mostly ethnic Albanians. Yeah, Kosovar Albanians. That makes... They're more homogenous. It'd be easier, in theory, it'd be easier to set up a state in Kosovo than it would be in, like, Bosnia, where you have diversity and different opinions, different backgrounds. It's easier to set up something that everyone's similar than it is different. Look at Iraq, for example. Iraq, after U.S. invasion in 2003. You've got borders that are... You've got major different groups living in a short, confined area. Tensions happen. Compared to if you were to isolate it, you might have a little bit different kind of situation going on. Does that make sense? Okay, can I go to the next slide? Okay, what is NATO? Remember what NATO is? Good, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, okay? So NATO comes about in 1949 as a result of the Berlin blockade. NATO's goal, okay? Well, it's an attack against one is an attack against all, okay? Originally it came about to stop Soviet advances, but again, this attack against one is an attack against all, is going to play a huge role, okay, in this. Now, Kosovo is not a NATO country. Okay, Yugoslavia is not a NATO member state. Okay, so why would they get involved here? What? They weren't, though. Because Kosovo, even today, still in 2022, is not a NATO member. Okay. There's a number of reasons here. Number one, okay, is NATO was originally formed to stop the Soviet Union. Okay. In the 1990s, by the mid to late 1990s, is the Soviet Union around anymore? No. Okay. There's a legitimate argument here of whether or not NATO even needs to exist anymore. Okay. Is it a relic of the Cold War that we don't need around anymore? Yes or no. They're going to be our NATO members. They're going to say, no, we want this here. Okay. A lot of other people are going to say, no, this isn't the case. We don't actually need this military alliance because the Soviets aren't around. Okay. NATO is also going to see some of the stuff happening and feel like if the United Nations is not going to really militarily intervene and stop this, we will. Okay. NATO is largely under the control of the United States. Okay. Just simply due to the sheer size of the U.S. In the 1990s, you go from having two superpowers, the Soviet Union to the United States, to the Soviet Union crumbling, and you've got one superpower. Okay, meaning the U.S. can do whatever the hell they want, and no one can stop them. So there's this. The United States was put under pressure in Rwanda to get involved. They did not. Okay, Bill Clinton is president at both times. Clinton personally has said Rwanda was the biggest regret of his presidency, not getting involved because he could have influenced the situation there and saved thousands of lives. There's also part of this here as we screwed up with Rwanda. We're not going to let this happen again. So kind of as a way of saying sorry for what happened previously, we'll get involved here and make sure this does not happen again. Okay. When NATO also bombed in Bosnia, okay, NATO had bombed Serbian positions, okay, when they were shelling Kosovo or Belgrade, or not Belgrade, Sarajevo. So they have his history of doing this in the past. Also, Yugoslavia is what type of country? It's what kind of government do they have in Yugoslavia? Think the big red star is like an example. They're communist, okay? It's a communist country. So you have a communist country right here. NATO was founded to stop the advance of communism, okay? You have that influence you can bring in here as well. Does that make sense? Part of it, they're not near as concerned because they're weak. and they're not the Soviet Union, and they never were aligned with the Soviet Union since like early on, because Stalin and Tito had a bit of a beef. But that's part of this as well. Okay, there is still some of the justification that they can use of, well, this is a communist country, so therefore we have a right to get involved. Make shock and awe. They had lots of big bombing campaigns. It is now. It wasn't at the time. Came about after, I believe, the 2003 invasion. That was the Bush policy in Baghdad. Shock and awe. Yeah. That was what, basically you just drop a bunch of bombs and like, holy crap, that's a big A-bomb. A does not stand for atomic in that instance, but yeah. Okay. Shock and awe. Okay, next slide. How did NATO get Serbia out, okay, of Kosovo? Number one, they do this bombing campaign. Okay, they primarily bomb Serbian bases, okay, Serbian cities. You get Novi Sad, okay, in the autonomous region of Vojvodina up north. It's going to be bombed. Radio stations are bombed. Okay, military headquarters are bombed. Artillery is bombed. NATO just starts bombing. Okay, bombs the crap out of Serbia. Basically says, if you don't leave, we're going to continue this. They kind of put them in a rock and a hard place between you either give up Kosovo or you continue to get bombed. Okay, more or less. Okay, the other thing to understand, not every country agreed with the NATO actions here. A lot of countries said this is not justified. You are bombing a sovereign country over a domestic issue. That's not okay. Okay, similar to disagreeing with China's position on human rights. So instead of going about diplomatically, you just start a war with China. Okay, that would be a similar kind of perspective going on here. That is really what NATO's doing. Okay, NATO goes in and does massive bombing campaigns against Serbian targets. Okay, largely in the media, and stopping this from spreading. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. Economic speaking. Okay. If you look at the economic impacts on the next slide, Kosovo is, okay, and was the poorest part of Europe. Why is that significant? Okay, they are incredibly weak, economically speaking. They don't have a lot of money coming in. Countries, if your house is destroyed and you have money, you can rebuild it. If your house is destroyed, you have no money, you can't rebuild it. Okay, when you have a war going on, people are not investing in your country. So you don't have a way of making income. You cannot find a new job. So you don't have a job in the first place. You can't find it. Okay? It's a cycle right through here. With an increase in poverty comes other issues. Okay? You have medical issues because you don't have access to the same resources. You have infrastructure issues. Okay? Life is just harder. You can't get the same quality of food. Okay? You tend to eat food that's very just cheap and easy, like bread, okay, potatoes that are filling, but they're not exactly the healthiest thing on the planet. Okay, you have this kind of crisis. Education is not going to be as advanced. Okay, when you don't have education, it's really hard to move up on the ladder. Socially speaking, it's problematic. Okay, they're not getting aid at this point from outside countries as well. Okay, they're not like getting the same amount of influence from Yugoslavia because of the conflict that's happening. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, physical impacts on Kosovo. Physically, it's bombed. Okay, hardcore. You have massive refugee trains moving out. Okay, not trains, people. Okay, there's also the incident of Milosevic and Serbian troops who were intermingled, okay, with refugees as a way of transporting them into the country or out of the country safely. That is a war crime. You cannot do that. NATO responded accidentally by bombing. Okay. they thought that it was a troop convoy, and it was actually a convoy of refugees. Okay, that's problematic. NATO, when they were bombing Belgrade, they hit the Chinese embassy. Okay, which if you bomb an embassy, that's a really bad thing, especially when it's a country that is not even who you're fighting. Okay, that's happening in Belgrade, so not in Kosovo, but it's going to destroy Kosovo's infrastructure. Bridges are downed in war, okay? So you have to rebuild all those. You don't have the money to do it. Homes are destroyed, okay? People are leaving the country. It's problematic, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, economic impact on the region. Okay, so this is talking about the Balkan Peninsula as a whole, okay? Yugoslavia is falling apart. This is not helping the cause at all, okay? Tourism is going to be really shut down, okay? Not like it's a major tourist place anyways. Exactly, okay? Business is not coming in. Tourism is not coming in. They're not making money, okay? So this war is hurting the entire region. That's kind of a quick overview of the economic policies and problems, okay? But the problems that are already happening in Yugoslavia are just getting worse, okay? Physical impact, particularly when you're looking at Serbia. Serbia will lose a lot of infrastructure as a result of the NATO bombing campaign. Okay, radio towers are destroyed, communications networks are destroyed, bridges, physical buildings are destroyed. Okay, the refugee crisis causes issues. Okay, when people are leaving, physically there's not good stuff happening. Okay, so it's similar to what Kosovo is experiencing. The difference is Kosovo is smaller. So if you wipe out like 2 bridges in a small place, that's going to be a lot more percentage-wise impact than it will on a large area. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. UN occupation. Why is that going to be problematic? Yeah, one, okay, he doesn't want him there. Does anyone really like being occupied? No, okay, unless you're the one who's being protected. Okay, it's going to cause tension between Serbia and the United Nations. Okay, other countries that think Serbia is doing nothing wrong are going to be frustrated with what's happening by the UN. Okay, a lot of people are going to, particularly Serbian nationalists, are going to feel like this is the United Nations coming in, taking a part of their country and making it their own. Okay, this would be equivalent to some outside government, okay, the UN coming in and saying the state of Florida is now going to be its own independent country. Okay, they're probably not going to like this. If you want to make a controversial comparison, okay, look at Palestine, okay, the United Nations saying this is now going to be Israel. Okay, how did that go over by the people in Palestine? Clearly not very well. Okay, it's kind of that, there's a different argument there, but in theory it's kind of that same idea of an outside government coming in and saying this is now not your land anymore. Okay, does that make sense? Based on ethnic reasons. De facto independence, okay? Kosovo is going to be granted by some countries, okay, independence, okay, its own sovereign country. If you go to Serbia today, Kosovo is not considered a country, okay? When I was there, I got a map in my car, rental car of Serbia. It included Kosovo. No distinction between border at all, okay? Some countries accept Kosovo as its own independent nation. Others do not. Okay, it's similar to like Palestine. Some countries accept Palestine, some don't. Okay, the United States, NATO members are going to be accepting of Kosovo as its own independent nation. Okay, those that are aligned with Serbia will not. Okay, impacts of this though, again, the tension is going to be there. You sort of solve the problem, but you also kind of just kick the can down the road. The tensions are still present. The tensions are still there. They've not really gone away. Okay. Does anyone have a question on that?
You said that the US and NATO accept Kosovo as a nation, and those aligned with Serbia do not?
Those that I don't know why there's a march going on outside. Yes, because Serbia doesn't view this as, they view this as their own part of their own country seceding, breaking away. if you're aligned with Serbia, you're not going to directly go against them on something that's so important to Serbia. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, after this happens, Milosevic will be removed from power. Okay. He will be arrested and charged with war crimes. This is the first time that a head of state has really been charged like this. And that is going to cause a lot of tension. Some are arguing that you cannot prosecute a government official for what they did as a leader. Okay. Others are saying no one is above the law. Everyone has the right to be tried if needed. Milosevic will be transferred to The Hague. Okay. Ultimately, he is going to die while on trial. But this is happening. Okay. Now, again, there were a number of war crimes that happened. Both sides did things that were very unsavory. There is some of the argument here of why did they prosecute Milosevic and not prosecute another person. Okay. Similar to looking at Kagame and Rwanda. Okay. Why did he get prosecuted or not get prosecuted, but others did? Okay. Things that Milosevic did. I would look into some of the crimes that were committed by the Serbian forces under Milosevic's authority. Okay, the Yugoslav forces under Milosevic's authority. Transporting soldiers under guise of humanitarian aid is not allowed. That was happening. Stationing them in bridges, under bridges, stationing them next to schools, okay, within the city, things like this are not allowed, yet Milosevic did it anyways. Okay, targeting people based on their ethnicity was happening. The justification here is that Milosevic deserved this because what he was doing was wrong and that no person should be above the law. Okay. He ultimately died, as I said, in prison on trial. He had a heart condition. His argument was he needed to go to Russia for medical treatment. That was not granted. The belief was that he was not going there for medical treatment, but he was going there for asylum because the Russians supported Serbia. So he ultimately did not go. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Against Milosevic, number one, is he was the president. He was a political leader. It's like you're targeting a political leader for what they individually chose to do within their own country, whether or not that is justified. Okay. Also, it's never happened before. There really was no precedent for doing this. Again, like Hitler, who would have been tried, was killed himself. Okay, so they couldn't do this. They've never really had another example where you charge the head of the state for actions their country did while they were leader. Okay. You're also picking on someone from a relatively weak country, while there are people from powerful countries who've done things that are arguably just as bad or worse that have not been put on trial. Okay. So it's like, why are you allowing him to do this, but not this person? Trying to think of another example. Okay, look at Gaddafi wherever. Okay, was not put on trial ultimately for what he did. Okay, so there's kind of this mentality of, well, why are you picking on him and not other people? Why is he the only one to go when there are other people doing just as bad things, if not worse, and getting away with it simply because of where they're from? Fair enough? Okay. Last one, international politics. Okay, how does this influence international politics? Number one, this is kind of the rebirth of NATO. NATO becomes stronger as a result of this. It strengthens that belief that NATO is still needs to be around. NATO still needs to be present. NATO will ultimately grow after this in 2004. Okay, it'll be expanded even further than it was previously. Again, kind of showing that NATO is impactful, is important. Yugoslavia will break up in 2003 officially. This really weakens Yugoslavia. It's kind of the death blow for Yugoslavia as a country. It increases tension that the UN is ineffective and shouldn't really be around. It doesn't do anything productive or needed for the world as a whole. Okay. You also have the first time where you have a head of state being tried for war crimes. So there's kind of a warning implicitly put there, or not implicitly, but implicitly put there to show other leaders that if you do horrible things like this, you could also be put on trial and be forced to pay for your crimes. Okay? That is a quick review of Kosovo.